There was a moment today, just before I bought my ticket to Madam Web, Sony's latest superhero venture, where I caught myself wondering, why am I even going? The last year or so hasn't been great in the world of comic book movies, many hitting the box office like a lead balloon. Whispers of superhero fatigue have now grown into a loud, resonant echo, and the room full of empty seats at my local cinema, on premiere day no less, felt like a solid sign that audiences are basically over it. Or are they? In a weird way, I feel kind of bad for Madam Web, a movie that the internet decided was going to be a flop before it even released. By the time this hits your feed, the movie will have been out for a bit. All the usual clickbait critics will have posted their snarky, overly irate reviews, score a few cheap laughs, and then move on to the next thing, because that's how cinema discourse works these days, I guess. In that sense, Madam Web, like many superhero movies, functions more like a glorified filler episode. You get the sense that it wasn't made because someone was burning to tell this particular story, but because a studio had a release date to fill. How did comic book movies get to this point? Blame the Avengers. Once Marvel started raking in billions from their cinematic universe concept, every studio in Hollywood wanted in on the action, but not everyone's got the characters. Sony lucked into a perpetual agreement with Marvel way back in 1999 when the then struggling comic company licensed over movie rights to Spider-Man and his associated characters. Under the 1999 contract's terms, Sony Pictures is required to produce a Spider-Man movie every 5 years and 9 months. If they miss that deadline, the agreement is then terminated and they lose rights to the character. So with movies to be made and Avengers setting the new standard, Sony figured, hey, let's do an interconnected universe of our own. But they only had the web-slinger and his supporting cast to work with, which, apart from a few key players, is admittedly not the strongest lineup. But in showbiz, you work with what you got, and since 2018, they've been slowly rolling out installments to the Sony Spider-Man Universe, so far consisting of 4 official flicks: Venom, Venom Part 2, the infamous flop Morbius, and now Madam Web. All of these based off of minor characters from the Spider-Man world. To say this latest movie takes creative liberties with its source material is an understatement. In the original comics, Madam Web is a blind and paralyzed elderly woman who has incredible psychic powers that she can use to pull the strings of the universe itself. And in the film, Madam Web is not that. Instead, the character is portrayed as a 30-year-old paramedic named Cassie, who starts developing clairvoyance following a near-death experience on the job. This newfound ability to see the future puts her in the path of 3 high school girls who she foresees dying at the hands of a not-quite Spider-Man villain who also, perhaps coincidentally, killed Cassie's own mother years earlier. And so our hero sets out trying to protect these 3 girls so that they can become Spider-Women, Spider-Girls, Spider-People of their own in the future. I want to be absolutely clear, I have nothing against the creative team that put this movie together. The director and the actors have all done great work in the past, and they will do great work in the future. But as I walked out of the theater and headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing had been nothing more than a $150 million excuse for Sony to hold on to their Spider-Man contract. Truly great superhero movies tackle important themes through over-the-top storytelling. The best of the best are often the creative vision of a single director or producer who has a genuine love of the source material and wants to translate what they felt from the comic onto the silver screen. Madam Web, by contrast, felt to me like a movie made by a committee, where it couldn't figure out what direction it wanted to go in, nor the story it was trying to tell. A movie with glaring technical issues that are at times stunning to witness in a big-budget motion picture. A movie that feels like it was being rewritten long after principal photography had concluded, which isn't uncommon. Reshoots are a part of the process, but this definitely had some major structural changes take place in the edit bay. As I watched the movie in theaters, this became painfully obvious from literally the first line of dialogue. Much of this movie has been dubbed over, and the dubbing is not good. Like, characters will routinely say entire sentences while the actors' mouths are either not moving or are clearly saying a different sentence, which is the kind of thing that I run into all the time when I'm a judge at student film festivals, not a Hollywood picture. I feel bad for the guy who plays Dark Side Spider Guy, especially. Every scene that he is in, the dubbing is horrendous. You can tell they try to mitigate this through the movie by putting him in the suit as often as they can, or they frame him in a way to try and mask the issue. No pun intended. There's a scene with him early on in the movie where he says this 3-word sentence while facing the camera, and then he turns his back to the audience and then gives this crazy long exposition dump where the fidelity of the audio is completely different. They clearly recorded this after the fact, and then he turns back towards the camera and says 2 more words, and it goes back to the audio track that they recorded on set. It happens in all of his scenes. It is so distracting. I almost wish they had just cut all of that stuff out of the movie completely. Even if the dubbing was perfect, every scene with the villain in his hideout is just a total drag. Dakota Johnson is by far the best part of this movie. She brings the exact energy that this movie deserves. Her and Adam Scott basically carry the picture. Don't be fooled by folks saying that the acting is bad. They're just saddled with poor material. You try making this line work. The movie also tries to be too many things. It's a superhero origin story, plus a suspense thriller, plus a monster horror, plus a time travel teen thriller, and depending on the scene that you're in, the dialogue will either go from totally stilted to genuinely funny to awkwardly cheesy, and the whole time I kind of wished the story would just pick a lane and stick with it. Anytime it felt like the story was actually starting to make progress, there would always be this annoying need to slow down and have a character do a forced information dump just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Hold up, things are getting way too exciting in this picture. Let's take a couple of minutes to shoehorn in some Spider-World mythology that nobody cares about. The whole time I was watching it, it felt like it was one movie when they shot it, but then something happened and they had to change a bunch of stuff in editing, and then it became something different. From a pointlessly convoluted and forgettable story to wildly hit or miss dialogue, Madam Web is a tangled mess no matter which way you look at it. But all of these issues are, I believe, actually a symptom of a bigger problem. Namely, what is the point of this Sony Spider-Man universe? We are 4 movies in now, and the famous wall crawler is still nowhere to be found. Why not? Blame the Avengers. In 2015, Sony and Marvel Studios announced a partnership that would lend out the Spider-Man character to appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This deal was groundbreaking. It involved 2 major studios collaborating on a character's film rights. Under this agreement, Marvel gets to use live-action Spider-Man for a few films, and in return, Sony gets a ton of money via distribution rights. Starting in 2016's Captain America: Civil War, Marvel Entertainment cast Tom Holland to play Peter Parker in Avengers movies and eventually branched out to their own standalone trilogy. But the relationship between these Marvel Universe movies and the Sony Universe movies is murky at best. See, the problem for Sony is that Marvel's Avengers Spider-Man is a box office behemoth. Tom Holland is one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood at the moment, and as a result, the MCU version of the character is super popular, but the MCU doesn't quite mesh with the SSU. It is quite clear that Marvel wants to take the character in a totally different direction than Sony, and it seems like both studios are fighting over what the best way forward should be. This is perhaps best illustrated by Tom Hardy's Venom films. The 2021 installment has a post-credit scene where they transport his character across space-time, landing him directly into Marvel's universe, only for Marvel to then unceremoniously throw him back out of the universe in a post-credit scene of their own just 3 months later. Nobody knows what's going on. Sony's biggest problem is that they're trying to build a Spider-Man series that only they own, but as long as Marvel's version of the character is the one raking in the cash, they can't risk tarnishing that partnership by taking the Tom Holland version and using it in their movies, especially if Sony's hypothetical films happen to flop, which they have a habit of doing. The workaround for now seems to be Sony focusing on a separate animated Spider-Man iteration, but that leaves this whole live-action series they're building in limbo. So until they get this whole mess figured out, the Sony Spider-Man Universe won't actually feature Spider-Man. Which is weird. Madam Web is full of wink wink nudge nudge references to the character, but it can't do anything beyond that because until the studio knows how they're going to move forward with the character, the creative teams making these SSU movies won't know how to either. Imagine, for instance, how much better this movie would be received if Sony had decided to replace rando evil Spidey lookalike in this movie with, I don't know, Andrew Garfield during his I stopped pulling my punches phase hinted at in No Way Home. Just have a quick cameo with him, and then if you want to save money on the production budget, just have him in the suit the rest of the movie and use a stunt guy. Have him act like a Michael Myers monster during the majority of the movie. Whoa, Andrew Garfield's back? And he's like a bad guy now? What's going on? Is he
possessed by Venom?
Doesn't have to be that, but the point is you can't explore possibilities like that because nobody knows who Spider-Man is in this Spider-Man universe. So, in the end, Madam Web suffers because Madam Web is the movie equivalent of a filler episode in a TV show where no one is sure when the main character is coming back from vacation. And with more seeming filler on the way, I am left wondering just how long the studio can keep this up before they make one flop too many. Here's the thing though. I don't think that there is a single person on the Madam Web production team that doesn't already know everything that I have just said in this video. You think the audio editors don't realize that a lot of ADR moments in this movie are genuinely painful? You think the actors don't know that the dialogue that they're reading is a mess? You think the studio doesn't know that they're burning money on a less than stellar movie lineup? Everybody knows. But Sony needed a movie out this weekend. Comic book movies nowadays suffer from an underlying issue in that many of them don't feel like movies. They feel like setups for cooler movies down the line, which is fine, but the problem is, I need to have an enjoyable experience in the movie that I'm watching right now for me to care about that bigger payoff later. And I don't know that I'm getting that. Especially if that movie constantly hints at future things the studio still hasn't figured out yet and might not even pursue. I have no confidence that I will see any of these characters ever again, and they are not telling me a satisfying story in the movie they're in right now, so why buy a ticket? I don't think audiences have superhero fatigue. I think they have bad movie fatigue. And look, studios can keep making movies like this if they want to, but I don't think they can keep spending this much on them. Also, I could be totally wrong. I don't know. I'm just a guy. With all that said, I wrote my own spider-themed hero story last year called The Spider Queen. It's based off a 1940s comic book hero with an eerily similar skill set to the famous web slinger. Admittedly, I am biased, but I think I like this story a lot better than the one that I just paid $12 to see. If you want to jump into a story unburdened by a multiverse of madness, maybe check it out. Links in the description and pinned in the comments below. Maybe you're not so much into reading. There is an Audible version available now too. Check it out. It's a good story. You might like it. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. They want to help you put together a beautiful website in no time. The process is simple. You start by choosing from one of their many stunning templates and then use their new Fluid engine to customize it just how you like it. Use member areas to host exclusive video content. And if you've got something to sell, their online storefront makes it easy. Head to squarespace.com to start a free trial today. Then when you're ready to launch your site in full, head over to squarespace.com/AustinMcConnell to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.